if you catch that cancer in the early stages, it's like somebody like me who is once again a hypochondriac. I look at that like, oh, well, I'm like, I want full body MRI every 3 months. Like, let's get this done. You know what I mean?
What is the difference between lifespan and health span? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today on the Prescription Press, the podcast where we break down trending medical topics so we can live longer and healthier lives. I'm your host, Nolan Fisher. I'm a physician who believes that the best medication is a healthy lifestyle. I'm joined today by my co-host, Sam Stix.
What's going on, man?
Hey, not a whole lot. You ready to get into it or what?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. So we saw a podcast that was by Dr. Peter Attia, who we've talked about before on the show, and Dr. Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about the difference between lifespan and health span. And this is something that's getting super popular, and it's kind of not really well defined. So I want to start off by talking about a conversation that we had earlier. This was maybe 5-10 years ago. And it was when I was in medical school, and we were talking about the yearly physical and yearly labs. And I thought that at the time, in young, healthy people, doing labs wasn't really that valuable. And I thought that our yearly physical should be tailored towards more functional measures. And as I've gone on, I actually believe that even more now. And so usually when you go in for your yearly physical, you may get like a couple blood measures. You may have a doctor walk in, listen to your heart, listen to your lungs, makes you feel good, taps on your knees with a hammer and says you're good to go. Well, I actually think that we should be doing more functional measures. And there's a couple of them that always came to mind to me. And that was movement. So like a 5-minute walk test where you just see how far you can walk in 5 minutes. And then some sort of cognition test, because I always thought those were the best ways to evaluate, especially aging individuals. Mm-hmm. But this episode of this podcast really got deeper into that. And now I left it thinking, oh, there's a lot more that we can do and a lot of value that we can add.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I think especially those physical tests where you can kind of have those measurable outcomes, I think that it also might kind of incentivize people to want to perform well for their physician, right? Almost like that pressure of like going and not wanting to embarrass yourself. It's like when you go to the dentist and you know you don't floss, and you're like, I'm going to floss a week before, and I'm going to let them know that I've been flossing. I'm going to try to trick them, right? Even if there was that incentive to try to even trick your physician into thinking that you've been living healthy this whole time, it might try to maybe spark some sort of a routine for you that you might actually adhere to moving forward, and you want to kind of continue to perform well for your physician. Like I said, any incentive we can offer people to want to get into these routines is probably going to be really beneficial.
I agree, too. I think it's also like a gamification, right? If you know your scores the last time you were in, and they say, hey, when I saw you last year, you know, your score on this test was a lot better. What's been going on over this last year? You know, that's a good way to evaluate how you're actually doing. And so I think there's a couple things we need to talk about first before we get into like what we can actually measure. And that's the definitions, right? So lifespan is just the total number of years that you're alive. It's simple. It's clean. I think of the lifespan like a cup, right? Some people live 90 years. Some people live 50 years. And the cup for them is 50-ounce cup or a 90-ounce cup or whatever. Whereas health span is what you fill the cup with, right? And so that's what you make out of those years that you have alive. And the way you look at health span is a measure of function rather than a simple number. And so a long health span would be somebody who is able to fill most of their lifespan with being functional. And being functional can be a bit subjective, but I think we'd all agree that it comes down to being able to be mobile and be able to be cognitively intact so that you can then do the things that you want to do, which may be golfing, it may be playing with your grandkids, or it may simply be playing games like chess, for example, or watching TV, whatever, and being able to enjoy doing those things that you like. So there is controversy with this whole health span thing because it's new. So there's a lot of different markers, and it's like, how do we all agree upon what's the best way to measure health span, right? And so there's a couple things that people have come up with, and that's the chronological age, which is the lifespan, like we talked about, versus the epigenetic age. And that is gaining popularity, but we're not sure how exactly beneficial that is in measuring.
Yeah. Yeah, and when it comes to that topic, in terms of chronological age, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. But when it comes to your epigenetic age, I've seen more and more studies about this. Like famously, like I think Dana White was one person who had a doctor basically come to him and like, hey, you're basically, if you keep living the way you're living, you've got so many years left, and essentially said, hey, your epigenetic age is older than your actual chronological age. So what are some markers that are used to kind of measure your epigenetic age?
So the epigenetic age has traditionally been measured with DNA methylation. Basically, DNA methylation is a methyl group that's added to your DNA that doesn't change its structure necessarily, but changes how active it is. And so if DNA is methylated, your body doesn't produce those genes, right? So it won't produce the proteins from those genes. Now, what they found, this relation to age with DNA methylation, has to do with the amount of methylation that occurs, especially in older individuals. So really old people tend to develop higher levels of methylation, and it seems to be, as you're aging, a good predictor of how close you are to dying. Now, what they found is that it's kind of unreliable, especially in younger people, and that in older people, it can be changed through certain lifestyle measures. So there are some people that think that if you change your lifestyle and it decreases your overall level of DNA methylation, that means that your actual age, your epigenetic age, is younger. And so that's how they're measuring it.
Okay, interesting. So I guess like if you're not being measured by a physician, right? I mean, obviously there's like the markers of just, you can tell somebody looks older than they are, or vice versa. I guess what are some kind of measures you can use, or some functional metrics you can use to kind of like measure yourself, or somebody else can maybe use to measure you in a non like super clinical setting?
Yeah. So I think that DNA methylation is kind of unreliable, and then it's hard to get. Most people aren't doing it, but I think there's certain things that have been done for a while that are reliable, and they can give you a more functional idea of what's going on with your body. So the first one is the VO2 max, which actually they talked about in this podcast, had the best correlation with longevity. And so the VO2 max is measured using a treadmill, and then there's a breathing device that's a face mask that's hooked up to you. And so what it measures is the amount of oxygen that your body can use at any given time. And so the way they do it is they get you on this treadmill and they gradually increase the pace. And eventually they get you to the point of like maximal output. And it's really hard to do because it's very taxing. It's like running an all-out sprint for as long as you can. And then you figure out what your VO2 max is. Now, most people would find that intimidating to do, and they may not want to go into a lab to get it done. It's honestly, in the grand scheme of things, not too expensive, especially compared to some other medical tests and stuff. But most people just don't know about it, and most physicians don't realize how valuable of a tool it is. But it's something that you can get done. I think it should be a pretty standard thing that people get measured. Like you said, the whole idea of people wanting to perform well year over year, that could be something that would incentivize them. Yeah. So the VO2 max, and like I said, best correlation with longevity. The other thing is lean body mass. So lean body mass can be done a few different ways, but the most accurate way to do it is a DEXA scan, which is traditionally used for bone density and measuring if people have osteoporosis. It also can be estimated pretty well, but lean body mass is just taking your overall body mass, subtracting the fat, whatever you're left with is your lean body mass. And that's a better index than BMI. I mean, BMI is really bad, right? It's just, that's what I've heard. That's one that everybody can appreciate. It just doesn't make sense, right? You have somebody that's an NFL player and their BMI is going to be overweight or obese. Yeah. But they may be just built head to toe with muscle. Yeah. Look at Aaron Donald. Like, that guy's probably super obese according to BMI, but he's a monster. Yeah. So then the other thing that I touched on in the intro is the 5-minute walk test, which is simply how far you can go in 5 minutes. And you'll see people measure this either outside or walking back and forth down a long hallway. I think it's valuable for older people, especially that aren't as mobile. So I would say measuring VO2 max in older people would be much more difficult. So I would more lean towards the 5-minute walk test to them. And you can challenge them year over year and see if they can improve it. Whereas the VO2 max, since it requires you to be mobile, I think that's better for a younger individual. And then finally, the grip strength. So grip strength has a very high correlation with your overall vitality and your health. And that's just because it's a good estimation of your functional muscle mass. So any movement that you're going to do that's going to require heavy weights is going to require you to grab stuff and pick it up. And that grabbing of, like, let's say you're outside doing yard work, you have to have grip strength to do that. That's a good measure. There's actually a couple measures for frailty, for seeing if somebody, let's say they have cancer, extremely old, neurodegenerative diseases, if they fall in the category of frailty, medical frailty, grip strength is actually used as a measure for it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other thing that they said in this podcast that really caught my attention was that cardiovascular exercise was the best way to maintain cognitive health, which is funny because you see a lot of advertisements for like games and stuff like that test your knowledge, they test your overall like memory and retention, stuff like that, abstract thinking, but those haven't really been shown to improve your cognitive health over time or to maintain your cognitive health. It's actually your cardiovascular exercise that helps you maintain the blood flow to your brain and maintains your cognitive health, which is pretty cool.
No doubt. I thought that was super, super interesting. I thought something that was especially interesting about the podcast was kind of talking about, for folks who currently are not performing any exercise at all, basically the benefit that they will see from going from 0 hours of exercise per week to 3 hours of exercise per week. So like that's essentially 6 30-minute walks of like, moderate pace, essentially. If they were to just do that, they would see a greater increase in just their overall health than a person would see from going from like 3 hours to perhaps like 15 hours potentially. So I thought that was kind of crazy. If there's like a baseline, if you hit it, it's like you're preventing a lot of bad things happening. I think they specifically cited, I guess, just overall mortality drops by 50% just by doing that brief kind of brisk walking, essentially.
Yeah. And so they talked a little bit about the zone 2 cardio thing, which is important to understand because it's very complex when you talk about the zones of cardio. But the ideal cardio for that 0 to 3 hours is, if you haven't been exercising, walking will usually get you there. And it's the pace that you walk where you can still have a conversation, but that conversation isn't as comfortable as like the conversation that you and I are having right now. So you may be a little bit breathy with that conversation and breathing hard, but you're still able to have it. Whereas if you are unable to have any conversation at all, you're probably over that zone 2. You need to back it down a little bit. The problem is that you end up getting in shape, right? And so that walking no longer gets you to that level. And something that I've always told people is, hey, you have to do more. You have to do more. And that can include running, biking, stuff like that. Well, those are all big steps. Like going from just walking to running, if you're somebody that doesn't run, that's a big deal. And it's intimidating too. And same with biking, swimming, stuff like that. That can be really intimidating for people. And they brought up the concept of rucking, which is just adding weight to your back. And so there's actually specific backpacks that you can buy that you can drop weight plates in to weigh yourself down a little bit and make it more difficult. And I thought that was just a great idea for people that want to get in shape. They enjoy walking. They don't want the hard impact of running. So they just can load up some weight and make that walking a little more difficult.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. And then finally, the end of the top of the podcast, Jordan Peterson got into behavior change and talked about the overall compounding effect of these positive changes in your life. And that part was really interesting to me because I think one of the reasons that we have such a mental health crisis and physical health crisis in our country is that people no longer have this purpose, right? And so until people really figure out their why, they aren't going to make a lot of changes, right? People aren't just robots that you can tell to make a change and they'll go make it. And so I do think that there's a big part of being someone's physician and taking care of your own health too, is finding out what the why is for that person. And it comes down to basically 4 questions. If I think about it, right? Why am I not doing this? Right. So why am I not exercising? Why am I not eating well? Why am I not sleeping enough? And then, what will happen if I don't make this change, right? What will be the negative impacts? Will you not be able to potentially play with your grandkids? Will you not be able to participate in sports with recreational sports with friends, right? Will I not be able to stay out of a nursing home whenever I age, right? So, and then there's that's kind of like the negative, right? Why am I not doing this? Mm-hmm. What will happen if I don't do this? That's kind of like the negative aspect of it. But then you could think about the positive aspect, which is what are the benefits that I get from doing this? And what will happen if I do this? Yeah. And so why should you do this? Well, it's going to be better for your heart. It's going to decrease your risk of cancer. And then what will happen if I do this? I'll feel better. I'll be able to go play in recreational basketball league without feeling like crap for 3 days afterwards. Mm-hmm. So really understanding behavior change and understanding your why is so important. We can talk about exercise and diet and stuff like that, but if people don't have a reason to change, then it's not going to get done. So I challenge people to have what's their reason to change, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And I know the end of the episode, essentially, too, Dr. Attia kind of wrote, I guess he kind of explained an exercise that he uses where he'll actually write down the name of all of his children, what mm-hmm. age he thinks they're going to have children, essentially kind of picture his life, what is my life going to look like at 80 years of age or 90 years of age? Mm-hmm. And what do the interactions with those people look like, right? So what does the interaction with my great-grandchildren look like if I'm of this, functional ability versus if I'm of this functional ability? And it's you can drastically see that essentially when you write these things down, okay, my level of, I guess, just interaction with these people is going to change so much if I'm able to have just a little bit more functionality where you're able to, drive yourself when you're older, or where you're able to walk up and down a flight of stairs, where you're able to, do things for yourself, essentially, where mm-hmm. your loved ones don't feel like they have to take care of you and they feel like you're just a part of the family, essentially. So I mean,
that's a really good exercise. Whenever he was talking about that, I thought that's really impactful because people, we live in a society that's very focused on ourselves. And I think people don't value how connected we are to others. And when you see that, how if you have an extra 10 healthy years at the end of your life, how that can mm-hmm. impact your grandkids can get to know you, how that can impact your kids taking care of you potentially. That can change a lot of things. And so the relationships between you and your kids, you and your spouse are going to be the most important ones in your life. And you have to understand that if you don't make these changes and you don't live this healthy lifestyle, then the chances that you have strain in those relationships or aren't able to live them to their fullest potential is much higher. So that was basically what I wanted to cover as far as the background. It comes down to, like I said, there's this chronological age, which is our lifespan. That's the total number of years that we live. But what we want to focus on is this health span. Having the health span, the level of function and ability to do what you want throughout your life is the most important thing in my mind. And by understanding your why and then implementing things like we talked about, the 3 hours of brisk exercise, brisk walking, cardiovascular exercise during the week, then you can really gain the benefits of improving your overall health span.
Another thing they touched on was diet for a little bit. And also mm-hmm. it sounds like a lot of Dr. Attia's research and stuff in the past has been centered around maybe insulin and mm-hmm. kind of loosely diabetes and obesity and kind of their relationship to each other. And this is one thing that I think everybody's heard of diabetes, obviously. Everybody probably knows somebody who has type 1 or type 2 diabetes. It's pretty mm-hmm. common in America now. But one thing they were talking about was, I guess, kind of the relationship between insulin and glucose. And I'm hoping you can maybe talk about that a little bit more, because from the way he was making it sound at first, he was kind of explaining that insulin is responsible for putting glucose into the muscles, essentially. So I'm thinking in my mind, okay, so like insulin equals good. You want a lot of insulin so you can put glucose into your muscles so it doesn't end up in other places. But then as he kept talking, he was kind of saying that like too much insulin can actually be bad for your larger blood vessels in your body, whereas glucose can be bad for the smaller blood vessels. Like he talked about optometrists, for example, are typically the first people to diagnose somebody maybe with diabetes who is maybe not diagnose diabetes, but diagnose vascular issues as related to diabetes potentially. So I guess, can you talk a little bit more about insulin specifically and whether or not insulin is good or too, like, you know what I mean? There's probably a fine line. It seems like too much is maybe bad. So can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's insulin has a function in our body, and that function is to take sugar from the blood and put it where it needs to be stored. Okay. So it can be stored in the muscles, it can be stored in the liver. Those are the primary two places for the sugar in our blood to be stored. Now there's a balance that occurs because we always have to keep our blood sugar in this healthy balance. So you want to have enough blood sugar so that your brain can get enough of the sugar. And then also so that if your muscles need more, it can deliver sugar to the muscles. With that being said, if it gets too low, you get hypoglycemic. And actually most people have probably experienced this before, and you get pale, you get shaky. And those are just, that's just your nervous system, like kind of panicking that you're getting too low on blood sugar. At the same time, if you're high, you don't tend to feel it as much, right? If you're high on blood sugar, you don't really notice it, but it starts depositing in your blood vessels, because it's like if you start pouring salt in a glass of water, you can stir it up and the salt will dissolve, but eventually if there's too much salt, it'll just come out in the bottom of the glass. And that's what happens with sugar. So with insulin and diabetes, there's two different types of diabetes, right? There's type 1, there's type 2. Type 1 diabetes occurs because there's no insulin production, or there's very little insulin production. Okay. And so type 1 diabetics will get really high blood sugars, but they aren't able to use that sugar. So they aren't able to take that sugar and put it to use in different places. So as a result, they actually use ketones for everything. And the reason their insulin is deficient is because they have an autoimmune disease that attacks the beta islet cells in their pancreas. And there's cells in your pancreas that are responsible for producing insulin. They're the beta islet cells. And this autoimmune disease of type 1 diabetes attacks those cells so they don't produce it. So what happens? Well, type 1 diabetics, they tend to be feeling fatigued all the time, and they tend to be urinating a lot. And the reason they're urinating is because their body's trying to pee out all that sugar, right? But their blood sugar is high, so their body is making them thirsty so that they can drink more water to bring down the blood sugar level. Yeah. And then the other thing is they don't store a lot of fat, so they tend to be very skinny. And that's because if your body has a high level of insulin, it doesn't break down fat, because your body, to start breaking down fat or lipolysis, the insulin has to drop below a certain level. Well, if you're insulin deficient with type 1 diabetes, you're already below that level, so your body's just constantly breaking down fat where it gets the ketones to use as energy, right? Got it. Okay. So with that being said, type 2 diabetes is actually the other side of the spectrum. So type 2 diabetes happens because you don't have places, your body becomes resistant to insulin. Let's put it that way. And so if your metabolism isn't working adequately, then you don't have the place, you start to build up fat in your muscles, right? So you don't have the place in your muscles for sugar anymore because fat's being stored there. Also, fat gets stored in your liver, which is another place where the sugar is stored. And then fat actually gets in your pancreas too and causes inflammation, which decreases the overall sensitivity to insulin. So you end up producing even more insulin. The overall level of insulin in your body is higher, but it's not as effective. So as a result, your blood sugars tend to be high, but it's because your body can't utilize that insulin as well.
Okay.
So realistically, when you look at type 1 diabetes, it's an autoimmune disease where you don't produce enough insulin. When you look at type 2 diabetes, it's a metabolic disorder where you're producing more insulin than usual, but as a result, you aren't using it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and then finally, the final part of that is because your insulin is so high, you don't break down fat as well. So type 2 diabetics tend to be obese, but then it actually makes it harder for them to lose weight because their insulin is so high.
Interesting. So let me ask you this then. You know, I'm aware of like insulin pumps, for example. Are those used to treat both type 1 and type 2 diabetes then? Or is it only for type 1? Because it sounds like you have a ton of it already in type 2, but are you giving yourself more essentially so your body essentially will start to recognize the insulin sensor, I guess? Okay, go ahead.
Realistically, type 1 diabetes, yes, like virtually everybody has pumps.
Okay.
And that's because you need a baseline level of insulin, and then you may need a little bit more when you have meals. Okay.
Yeah.
But in type 2 diabetes, the goal should be to not use insulin. However, some people get to such an uncontrolled state that they have to use insulin because the bad parts of having the sugar so high in the blood outweigh the bad parts of having even more insulin and not being able to break down the fat.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And you were talking a second ago about, I guess, different parts of the body getting fat, right? Like fatty liver disease you hear about a lot. I know that he also kind of used a bathtub analogy, Dr. Attia did, where he basically said, like, everybody's kind of born with a bathtub where they can hold a healthy amount of fat. And for certain people, that bathtub's going to be small. For other people, that bathtub is going to be large. And once the bathtub fills up, if it starts overflowing, it's in the same way that if a bathtub overflowed in your house, like obviously it's going to start to damage other things in the house. So for different people, it's like, where is that water going to flow essentially? And for some people, it ends up in their liver, for example, and other people, it ends up in a lot of different areas essentially, which are even in the muscle, for example, is also detrimental to your health from what it sounds like. So I really like that analogy just in terms of like, all right, at a certain point, you want to have fat in your body. That's obviously something that's good for you overall. But at a certain point, it starts to leak in other places where it starts to have detrimental effects and can actually exacerbate the diabetes issue in the first place if you have diabetes. So I mean, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is probably the most common cause. I think now it's actually the most common cause of end-stage liver disease. And end-stage liver disease is basically happens because there's inflammation in your liver, and that inflammation is taken care of, but it scars. And so instead of a healthy liver, you're left with a scarred liver, and that's called cirrhosis. Interesting.
And the cirrhotic liver doesn't work. And so that leads to all sorts of complications. But essentially, once you're cirrhotic, the only way to treat it is with a liver transplant. And it used to just be that most people either got liver transplants because they were previously alcoholics or they had an infection like hepatitis C. And then, of course, there's some small percentages of like autoimmune disease and stuff. But now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is super, super common.
Interesting. I know this is kind of a side note here. When it comes to like the liver transplants, I guess I would imagine folks who are alcoholics probably fall lower on the list in terms of being able to receive those. I guess probably just from a standpoint of they're probably going to, I don't know, potentially repeat their issues or want to drink more essentially and damage their new liver potentially. I don't know. Are there like where do people fall on that list?
Typically they have a list, right? A transplant list. If you aren't sober for at least 6 months, typically you don't get the transplant. And that's how it's been in places that I've lived.
Interesting.
It worked. Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So they want to see at least some duration of people staying sober. And the sad part is that honestly, you see young people that die from it all the time that just can't stay sober.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. But I know we were talking about diabetes there for a second. I think something that's kind of related to diabetes is obviously diet. And that was something that was very interesting. I guess first things first, Dr. Peterson at least mentions, I know that he's not a dietitian by any means, and he's not a medical doctor either, but he talks about the importance of not drinking soda essentially. And I think that's probably something that's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you're drinking, what are you drinking there? You got some sparkling water?
I got some sparkling water. No sugar in it.
There you go.
I do like a good soda every now and then.
Soda's great.
So,
Soda's
come
great.
on.
Yeah, I know. I know.
But there's a lot of people that are drinking a lot of calories from soda and not even realizing it.
For sure.
The one thing that I liked that they talked about was that not all calories are created equal, right?
Yes.
And so when it comes down to a physiologic standpoint, in the body, a calorie may be a calorie, right? And it may not be able to tell the difference. But when it comes down to the psychological effects and the other effects of different calories, then the whole foods, the things that are like plants and animals and are more natural, they're going to tend to be more satiating, right? So you're going to be fuller for longer after eating them. Whereas the stuff that you typically think about as junk food, right? That's just simple carbohydrates and sugar. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of calories from them, but you aren't going to get full from them. And they really don't know why it is. And they think there may be some sort of nutrient basis to it, but they're not really sure. And so, I don't know. I think that the food pyramid that we were all shown as kids was meant to serve a purpose. And that purpose was not necessarily teaching us the healthiest habits. It was more of just getting the most people fed for the cheapest amount of money. Yeah,
no doubt. I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think we obviously grew up. I remember just like grains and carbohydrates basically being there on the bottom. Like you need the most of these.
Grains and dairy.
Yeah. True.
It's like grains, dairy. Yeah.
That's right. And now people are very anti-dairy for sure. And I think, people are starting to become anti-carbohydrate a little bit when you see all these things, ketogenic diet and stuff like that too. These things. But
then you have a bowl of like fettuccine Alfredo and you're like, how anti-carb can I be?
I know. It's so true. It's so true. And dairy for that matter too. So you get the best
seriously.
But man, I know it's kind of funny. Dr. Peterson was talking about that he is on the carnivore diet. And I've seen other things on Twitter and whatnot where he kind of promotes this diet, which is very interesting. I know Joe Rogan tried it for a while too, where he did nothing but eat meat. I think specifically red meat, like literally nothing else besides red meat. And I don't know. It's funny because I got Dr. Attia's kind of initial reaction to that. You could kind of tell he was quickly like not trying to recommend that to anyone. He's like, I wonder what other foods you could introduce. Like that was one of the first things he said. Like, like that's great that works for you. I wonder what other foods you could introduce without experiencing detrimental health effects. It sounds like there's like autoimmune disorders that potentially Dr. Peterson and his daughter were experiencing. That's kind of the initial reason for why they switched to that diet. But I don't know. I think
that some people have these weird autoimmune disorders and we don't know what it is. Right. Yeah. And there's no way that you can test every single thing that a person is experiencing. So naturally people go to diet. And I think there are some people that like, if they just go to that diet for whatever reason, their autoimmune disease clears up because it's not just them. If you look at it, you could just search on the internet and you can see groups of people who that has worked for. Yeah. I'm not really sure why. And who knows? It's just like the classic elimination where you just eliminate everything until you get down to something. If that works, then you just stick with it. But I agree with what Dr. Attia said. The other thing too that they didn't mention that I wish they would have talked about was the relationship between fiber, right? So fiber intake, the more fiber you have, your risk of colon cancer drops like significantly. It's like every 10 grams of fiber you have, it like drops your risk of colon cancer by 10% or something.
Interesting.
Don't quote me on that, but it's a significant drop. So I think that incorporating like leafy green vegetables not only provide you with the nutrients, but I also think that they have fiber, which prevents colon cancer. It also fills you up. It's not a calorically dense food. So it fills you up and it adds some of that variety into your diet because at the end of the day, like we're omnivores. So we like to eat a bunch of things. And I think adding that variety in your diet is good. But I understand. I mean, not everybody's the same and some things work for some people and some things don't. I think overall, the biggest takeaway that I got from Peter Attia was that it's not necessarily about a calorie versus another calorie. It's just the overall quality of the food. And if more people would understand that things like chips, things like soda, fast food, they're just not high quality food. Yeah, no doubt. I have one other side note on diet that I thought was kind of interesting from the podcast. And it relates directly to like arthritis. I don't know. Dr. Peterson kind of talked about this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this at all, but I guess he said people who
I guess, have been fasting will sometimes experience a relief in their arthritic symptoms. I'm not sure if that's something that you had been aware of before. And once again, Dr. Peterson's not a medical doctor, so I'm not sure what he's seeing, but I'm just curious to know if you ever heard of that before.
Yeah, that's something I've heard of before.
Okay.
And it kind of actually makes sense to me, right? I think that like your body will focus on what it needs and what its like requirements are. Once the requirements are filled, it can focus on other things. And not having food and being in a state of like basically not starvation, but fasting is essentially, getting yourself towards that direction is going to be way more important to your mind than having aches and pains from knees and in your knees and hips and stuff from arthritis. So I'm not shocked to see that people's arthritic symptoms really diminish whenever they're fasting. So whether that's from a lack of inflammation or not, I don't know. I would guess that your body, whenever you're not having as much food, would say, hey, inflammation is probably not the best use of energy right now.
Yeah, good point.
Let's decrease the inflammation. So that's what I would guess. I would assume that that's very real. But at the end of the day, right, you can't fast forever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's like, okay, that's great, but I don't know. You can't fast forever.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, man. I guess I kind of lied. There's one more kind of topic here that's kind of loosely related to diet, essentially. And it's basically the fact that smoking and obesity are kind of like the leading factors of, I guess, it increases your likelihood of developing cancer, basically.
Yeah.
And obviously, diet is related to obesity. The smoking piece didn't surprise me there. I actually wasn't aware that there was a correlation between obesity and cancer. I guess it kind of makes sense because I think cancer cells kind of grow, I think a lot of times on glucose potentially. So it makes sense that the more, I guess, you're ingesting, the more glucose you're ingesting, there's probably a correlation between you being a larger individual and also giving cancer more of an opportunity to feed on glucose and grow. I don't know. That's something that kind of surprised me a bit, but I just never heard of that before. I didn't know if that's something that you were.
So we all think of smoking, right? So smoking has carcinogens in it, but realistically, part of the reason why smoking causes cancer is because it causes inflammation. Right. Smoking causes inflammation all over your body, and it actually damages structures all over your body by constricting the blood vessels repeatedly. So you smoke, the carcinogens go in your lungs, the nicotine goes throughout your body. So the carcinogens go in your lungs, which can explain lung cancer, right? But the nicotine causes your blood vessels to constrict. And so as a result, people's bones become weak because they aren't getting enough oxygen because their blood vessels are constricted. So if you are somebody that needs a spine surgery, a good spine surgeon will not operate on you if you are smoking because you have over a 90% chance of failure from that surgery. I'm talking about literally heart, like metal screws and stuff coming loose out of bones.
Wow.
The other thing is that it not only does that in your bones, but it does that in your organs too. So it causes inflammation. And so that's why people who smoke can develop all sorts of different kinds of cancer, right? As far as being obese, you get an inflammatory response just simply from being obese, right? You have a general higher level of inflammation. You also have a higher level of baseline lactic acid. So, and lactic acid produces inflammation. Now, lactic acid in muscles realistically should produce a temporary inflammation, which helps your muscles learn that they need to store more glucose and causes them to get bigger and stuff. But this overall level of inflammation being high does kind of the same thing as smoking, right? It causes this cancer risk, and we know inflammation and cancer are associated. So I wasn't surprised to hear him talking about that. It's pretty interesting to me when you see. I would be interested to see what the correlation is between smoking and obesity in cancer, right? Do they have a 1+1 effect, or do they have a 10 times 10 effect, right? Yeah. So I don't know what that is. I think it would be interesting to see, and I don't know what the studies would say about it, but I would assume that they have more of a multiplicative effect than just an additive effect.
Yeah, no doubt. And obviously you talked about those two factors as kind of like, or those two variables as kind of being the most important factors in terms of, I guess, somebody potentially developing cancer. But that doesn't, there's plenty of people, like you mentioned, that are still perfectly healthy, never smoked, not obese, that are developing cancer. I think I'm trying to remember the number he cited, but it was very significant. So there's obviously a large piece of the equation of us not understanding why cancer develops yet that's still not understood.
Yeah.
So it's interesting as we kind of start to solve these pieces of the puzzle to see if we'll see a reduction in cancer in the future. I guess on the topic of cancer as well, it seems like, I've watched a lot of different podcasts and listened to a lot of different lectures and stuff on the subject. It sounds like most of the, I guess, improvements that we've seen in cancer research and stuff haven't really come in the form of treating cancer as much as they've come in maybe preventing cancer. Like, we understand that cancer prevention is like the most important aspect in somebody's, I guess, overall likelihood of living with cancer effectively. Obviously, if you catch cancer at stage 1 or stage 2, your likelihood of beating it is much greater than if you catch it in stage 3 or stage 4. And a lot of the, I guess, improvements that we've seen in cancer treatment haven't really come to fruition like I think we were hoping. I think that ultimately, like 30 years ago, radiation and chemotherapy were kind of the main treatments, and we still see that to be true to this day. So I think, like I said, the important thing is maybe screening, like Dr. Attia talked about. And one of the things that he mentioned was like very aggressive cancer screening. And he doesn't want to promote it too much, I guess, because it's a somewhat controversial topic, right? You don't want to take somebody who's perfectly healthy and something shows up like on an MRI, for example, and then they end up getting treated for that. And it's like, it wasn't even needed in the first place. It turned out to be completely benign. Obviously causes people to worry, things like that. It's also very cost prohibitive. It kind of backs up the medical system in terms of people who actually need those MRIs, maybe are not able to get access to them. But I got to be honest with you, when I hear something like, oh, he promotes aggressive cancer screening because it basically, if you catch that cancer in the early stages, it's like somebody like me who is once again a hypochondriac. I look at that like, oh, well, I'm like, I want full body MRI every 3 months. Like, let's get this done. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I don't know. I thought that was kind of
obviously
interesting.
that's prohibitive, right? Yeah. There's a lot to it. I will say this: we've made, for certain types of cancer, there has been tremendous improvements in the medications, and so there's been like immunotherapies and gene therapies and stuff like that. And so like the blood cancers are a good example of that. Leukemias and lymphomas, we've done a great job with. But there are a lot of types of cancers that we've only made marginal improvements in the treatment of. The problem with some of the biggest causes of mortality in cancers are the types of cancers that they are, like pancreatic, which usually isn't caught until extremely late. So detection, right? Early detection is super important. One of the things he brought up was that the 10-year survival of somebody with stage 4 cancer is basically 0, where the 10-year survival of somebody with stage 3 cancer is like 60%. And that's just general, but still it makes sense when you think about it. Aggressive screening has been shown to be successful in cervical cancer. For example, cervical cancer was a major cause of death, and because of early screening, has been reduced by like 95% or something crazy like that. And then, of course, colonoscopies are kind of standard, but they're standard at 50 years old. Well, maybe that's too late. Maybe that needs to be 40. Yeah. Maybe that needs to be 35. I don't know what the right number is, but obviously there's costs that are associated with it, and the insurer is not going to want to pay those costs. Yeah. And so, like, don't get it mistaken. Your insurance company is not interested in your health. And if they were interested in your health, they would pay for more preventative options. But the truth is that the average person stays with their job for 3 years, so they're covered with that insurance for 3 years. So they can, if you get some sort of bad cancer, well, that's most likely going to be passed on to somebody else. Right. And then the overall resources available could be an issue as well. MRIs, colonoscopies, stuff like that. Those could be issues. The thing that's also started to happen too are mammograms. Mammograms keep getting moved earlier and earlier. And I think that's a great option as well, because breast cancer is a great example of one that if we catch early, we can really save lives. So I do agree. I agree with the early cancer screening. And the problem with our country our healthcare system has a ton of issues. The insurance is a huge problem that's complex. But at the end of the day, because it's tied to your employer and people change health insurance so frequently, they don't have a lot of interest in preventative care. And so your preventative care is going to have to come a lot of, if you want to do more aggressive stuff like this, it's going to have to come from out of pocket.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see that people with more means are going to be able to do things like that. Yeah. And, it should be available. And if it is available and is popular, then maybe there'll be more people who will do it, and that will bring down the cost.
Yeah. It seems like that might be the case already, to be honest. I know, obviously I already looked into full body MRIs, and I'm like, what is the cost of this? Right. And it seems like it's maybe a bit cheaper than it was a few years ago. So I think that you're going to see more and more clinics kind of pop up like that, where you can go and get advanced imaging stuff done completely electively. So
I think that's true. I think it'll be interesting to see, because as our country becomes richer and richer, our focus is going to be on how can we not die?
Yeah.
Right. If we have money, we have nice houses, and we, have hopefully good social relationships, then our focus is going to be on how we cannot die.
Yeah.
So I agree with the aggressive screening. Unfortunately, the insurance companies don't want to cover it, so they're going to push back. And ultimately they have their money going into the pockets of people that make these guidelines as well. Mm-hmm. So it's something that we got to be educated about. So at the end of the day, I want people to take away from this podcast that you can make changes in your lifestyle that can make you healthier for longer. And yes, there is the chance that you're going to catch some sort of cancer that you could have done nothing about. But realistically, you can give yourself a better shot of having a lower risk of cancer and dealing with cancer, and then also living longer and healthier by just implementing little lifestyle changes. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take 15 hours of exercise per week. You get most of the benefit from just 3 hours of exercise per week. Yeah. And it doesn't take only eating salads to lose weight and that being the reason you change your diet. No, it just takes you eating more whole foods that are more natural and that aren't those typical junk foods that are just high in calories that don't satiate you or provide any nutrition. And then finally, make sure you're doing your preventative screening. And if you can, advocate to get your preventative screening done early. And there are people out there that don't want to know, but at the end of the day, you'd rather know early because that's when you can do something about it.
Yeah, that's perfectly said.
Yeah. Cool. So that's it for the episode today. This is the Prescription Press. Again, I'm joined by Sam Stix. I'm Nolan Fisher. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please click subscribe below. And if you're on YouTube, leave a comment and let us know what you think about screening. Let us know what you think about the diet that we have in our country, and let us know about ways that you have made changes in your lives. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
See you, brother.